Hosting for the Dice Tower is generously provided by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool Stuff, in stock at coolstuffinc.com. Thanks for your support. The Dice Tower, Episode 454.
Pros and Cons of Retheming.
Welcome to The Dice Tower, a podcast about board games and card games, and especially the people who play them. On today's show, we explore the biography of Survive, try our hand at causing an inciting incident, look at the welcoming power of party games, and more. Plus, a trio of new tales, one of which leads to us trying to use games as a sort of personality test, and we come together to discuss the pros and cons of retheming a game. I'm Eric Summerer, and here's your host, the small world to my Vinci, Tom Vassell.
That's right, baby. I've just made you obsolete. No one will ever play you again.
Many people consider me mechanically a very strong contender.
I feel like there's 3 people who think that.
You're right. There aren't that many people. I picked a terrible example.
I don't know. Jason Levine insists that Vinci is better than Small World.
Yeah.
He's wrong.
I can see maybe enjoying it more. Maybe you don't like the whole fantasy thing.
Okay. I guess that. No. He's wrong.
Gotcha.
Hey, folks, we're going to... I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Eric Summerer.
Shut up, man. I'm new at this podcasting thing.
Yeah, you know, it's only been 450 some episodes.
I had a thought today. What if we retired the show at episode 500?
What if we did that? Wouldn't that surprise everyone?
Well, not because I just mentioned it, but...
Well, no.
Well, you know,
is this something that's likely to happen?
We could move on to, like, other podcasts and other things.
I guess. Maybe I'd finally get those videos done, I promised.
We'd call this pulling a game on.
Ooh. You know, it's still too soon. Too soon, Tom.
Anyway, it has me thinking, anyway, we're here to talk about board games. And we're going to actually start with someone else talking about a board game. The biography of a board game. So, cut to music.
Every game has a story, and this is one of them. Presenting Biography of a Board Game with your host, Professor Scott Rogers.
This time I want to talk about a game that's a favorite in my own household. Survive, also known as Escape from Atlantis and The Island. Veteran game designer Julian Cortland Smith was inspired when he noticed there were a lot of books about Atlantis in his local library. He thought, if the mythological island were that popular, then it would make a good theme for a board game. In Survive, players must get their Atlanteans off of the rapidly sinking island. They sail or swim to safety over an ocean that is increasingly populated with hostile sea creatures like sharks, whales, and sea serpents. Cortland Smith spent 18 months working on his prototype and trying to figure out how flooding the island would work. The breakthrough came when he realized he didn't need to flood the island. Instead, he could sink the island by simply removing tiles. In the original prototype, plastic dinosaurs represented sea serpents, and the islanders had a royalty class that were worth more points if saved first. Pirates attacked the players' fleeing ships, but they were replaced by a whale in the final game. And the whales were later replaced by an octopus. Survive was published by Parker Brothers in 1982, with box art by Tom Cook. The Parker Brothers version of the game ends with the island exploding, killing all the remaining survivors at sea. Later editions removed the volcano and added a dolphin that helped the players safely reach land. In 1986, UK game company Waddington, who published Cortland Smith's Lost Valley of the Dinosaurs, wanted to make a 3D version of Survive. Cortland Smith suggested an alternate space theme called Escape from Planet X, but Waddington kept the nautical theme and released the game as Escape from Atlantis. This version featured modular 3D plastic island tiles and sculpted sea monsters. It also included the Atlantean Swirler, a plastic disc that used a ball bearing to determine when a sea creature moved. In 1996, Parker Brothers released the game in Europe as Escape from Atlantis, this time with highly improved 3D sculpted island plastic pieces and gorgeously sculpted sea monsters. The game remained out of print until 2012, when Stronghold obtained the rights and came out with a 30th anniversary edition. The game featured a cover by designer-artist David Osloos and a revised theme where explorers find and escape Atlantis before it sinks. They also introduced a new monster, the giant squid, that could reach onto the land and grab survivors. Asmodee published the game in Europe and renamed it The Island. This version featured a cover by Jean-Brice Duguet and won Family Game of the Year. A space version of Survive was finally created when Stronghold released Survive Space Attack. The game was designed by the Engelstein family and had cover art by William Bricker. In this retheming, the crew of the space station Atlantis evacuate as aliens attack the survivors. Fighter ships and laser turrets are just a few of the game's new mechanics. An expansion titled The Crew Strike Back was released in 2015. With its take-that mechanics and tense countdown gameplay, Survive is a sea full of danger and oceans of fun, no matter which version you play. Next time, we'll look at one of the vanguards of the German game movement of the 90s, Carcassonne.
Until next time, this has been Biography of a Board Game with your host, Professor Scott Rogers.
I love these little tidbits that I learn about these games.
Yeah, this is great. Great, I really love this stuff. Fantastic.
Like, where does he find this stuff? I mean, does he... He probably has, like, a whole library of game knowledge. That's what professors have, right? Libraries of game knowledge?
Well, yes, Eric. But it's secret, and you can't see it till a certain time. You have been in the hobby long enough yet. I believe it's 35 years.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that.
Hey, let's talk about some games we played lately. Your first title here sounds interesting.
Well, this would be Avalanche on Yeti Mountain. This is a new Green Couch Games small card game. And you are skiers, and you are trying to make it down from Yeti Mountain. You've arranged sort of a large track, which is like a big winding path, and each card on this path as you go down the mountain is color-coded, and it has different spaces that your skier could be on as it winds its way down the mountain. In addition, there is another track, kind of a different set of lines that the Yeti, there's a Yeti meeple, the Yeti can go along, and this is bad if the Yeti hits you, because the Yeti is going to turn off your rocket skis. Did I mention you have rocket skis? You have rocket skis.
This is sounding good.
Each round, you are going to play one card from your hand, possibly a couple of cards, and then everybody flips up. And based on the number of players, there is a speed limit. And you total up the cards that everybody has played. They're all numbered. And if the total is over the speed limit, well, somebody's in trouble. Whoever is going the fastest is going to stall out, which means they're not going to move very far. They're just going to move like one space. If you have an active rocket ski, and you play a card that's the same color as the card that you're on the space that you're on, you do like a rocket jump, and you skip a card and jump to the next card and then do your movement, which is a great way to get ahead of other people. However, if you broke the speed limit and you stall out, well, then your rocket jump is not going to work very well. You'll skip that one card, but then you're going to fall over on the first space that you get to. This is bad because whoever is in last place gets to move the Yeti. And the Yeti meeple is going to move a certain number of spaces. And if they hit you, they'll turn off your rocket skis. And that means you can't do the rocket jump. You can't move, you can't jump cards, which will severely affect your ability to avoid the avalanche. Did I mention there's an avalanche? Oh, there is. As people do these rocket jumps, they will increase the speed that the avalanche moves down the mountain. So if a bunch of people do rocket jumps, that avalanche is going to move up very quickly. And that is how you die in the game. If the avalanche reaches you, you're dead and you're out. And so, because you want to move fast down the mountain, a lot of people are going to be trying to do rocket jumps as quickly as they can, which is going to speed up that avalanche pretty quickly. And if you are the dunderhead that played the highest card when you exceed the speed limit for the group, well, you're going to fall over and get caught by the avalanche pretty quickly. We played the game twice, and people died in like the first turn. Then we found out that you weren't allowed to rocket jump, but it's not very clear that you can't rocket jump in the first turn because they give you a wild way to rocket jump. If you play 2 cards of the same suit, that's like a wild rocket jump. It doesn't say you can't do it on the first turn, but anyway, we figured out you can't do that. And then we made it a little farther down the mountain, but eventually that avalanche is moving so fast down the mountain because people are trying to move as fast as they can that it's just impossible to avoid it. And so the Yeti won both times we played. I wasn't a fan of this one. It's too chaotic for me. It just seems weird to want to go as fast as possible. You're racing down the mountain, but then you have this weird arbitrary speed limit that's going to cause you to fall over because you're going the fastest. And then just based on how the Yeti hits you, if the Yeti hits you, but you have no control over where you stopped because you could only move one space, and only one person can be on each space, so you might get pushed forward into the path of the Yeti through no fault of your own, and then your rocket gets turned off 3 turns in a row, and you're just going to get crushed by the avalanche. I don't know. It was just too nutty for me. Avalanche on Yeti Mountain, it's a pass for me.
I'm always worried when Eric gives the game a pass because then that means it's really bad. Also, whenever Eric gets super fake enthusiastic, we know it's going to be bad.
Maybe.
Yes. Hey, let's talk about Conquest Stratego.
Stratego?
This solves the age-old problem of 4-player Stratego.
Oh.
Well, not really. Okay, this is a Stratego game, and it has pretty much the normal pieces a Stratego game has, although it calls them some of the stuff's called by other names. Instead of bombs, they're cursed lands or whatever. But the pieces are rounded so that, and they have like this slit in the middle. It's hard to explain, but you can always see what a piece is by looking straight at it.
Yeah.
So it allows 4 people to sit around and play on the table with these pieces, and no one else is going to see your piece.
Without seeing.
So there's 4 colors. So on your turn, you can move pieces, and the number of pieces you move is based on how many castles you have on the board. But before you do that, you're going to draw cards. And the number of cards you draw is based on how many territories you control. You draw these cards and you pick one of them. So even if you control a ton of territories, it means you have more cards and you can only pick one of them. And then you play that card, which gives you some special ability. Maybe it gives you more movement. Maybe lets you switch a couple of your pieces. And then you move just like normal Stratego, where you move your piece into something else. You compare them, and the higher number beats the lower number, except the 1 beats the 10. The cursed lands beat anything except the number 2 could beat the cursed lands. Or number 3s. I forget what the numbers are.
Right, the bomb and the guy who can defuse the bomb.
Right. That's essentially it. And you know what? I went into this expecting it to be pretty horrible, and it was not. It was actually pretty fun. Pieces were getting murdered right and left. There's no semblance of strategy. It's silly fun, and if you go into it with that in mind, I think it's enjoyable. We have to move pieces around, and you're trying to guess where the other flags are. If your flag is captured, you are not out of the game. If you can capture the person's flag who captured yours, you're back, baby. However, if someone captures all 3 other people's flags, they win, which you do start kind of on a downward trend when your flag's been captured, because you no longer get to play cards anymore. Just move pieces. Not as exciting. It's a pretty neat little game. I don't think it's going to appeal to much of our audience, but we had a good time playing Conquest Stratego.
Next up for me is a new one from Looney Labs called Mad Libs the Game.
Oh, give me a Mad Lib.
Okay, hang on 1 second. Let me get the box. All right, so everybody knows what Mad Libs are, right? You got the little notebook, and there's a bunch of blanks, and there's some sort of story, and you have to fill it in with adjectives and verbs and adverbs and all this stuff. So Mad Libs has 2 decks of cards. One is stuff like, plural noun may make the world go round, but it's adjective, plural noun, that pay the bills. Okay, so now you have a hand of cards, and these are word cards, and the word cards will have, at the top it'll say something like drive, but then it will also say, here's the verb version of drive, and then there's an adjective version, driven, or a noun version, drive or drivers. So you can play this, and it's all color-coded, so you can sort of, match up the colors that you're looking for to fill in the blanks on the card that is at the center of the table. So everybody looks at their cards and comes up with some sort of selection that's going to work for this particular thing. So, I don't know, let me see. We got, players may make the world go round, but it's moist noise that pays the bills. And then everyone votes once everyone has, given their assortment of wacky word insertion. And the whole group votes. You sort of go 1, 2, 3, point, and you point for the one that you like the best. And whoever gets the most votes gets that card, and you flip it over. It has sort of a trophy on it. And whoever gets 3 of these wins the game. Now, the results that was almost randomly picking those cards. That's kind of what happens. And that's kind of what happens in Mad Libs as well. You just sort of, you don't really know what the story is, so you're trying to choose silly words, and the results you get are pretty zany and pretty nonsensical. And because you only have 7 cards in your hand, you aren't always going to have things that fit whatever the situation is. And so you're forced to kind of figure it out and pick combinations of words that aren't going to make a whole lot of sense. But you have to use cards that you have in your hand, so you got to fill in the blanks somehow. And so the whole thing ends up feeling a little nonsensical and random, which is what Mad Libs is. So thematically, I think they've captured it. But I don't know. I played with a small group, but I wasn't enamored with it. Because it just seems so weird. I mean, I was faced with all these cards in my hand, and I couldn't figure out how to make them make sense in the sentence that I was supposed to be doing. That could have been a bad draw, but that may just be the way that the game works. So I didn't have fun with it. It matches Mad Libs, but I don't really like Mad Libs. But my son had fun, and he giggled a lot. So there's that. Mad Libs, the game from Looney Labs. I'm kind of a no on this one.
This has been a bad day for Eric Summer, folks. 2 negatives in a row.
Ugh.
Here, I'll bring us back. Apotheca. This is a new game from Renegade Games. Now, in Apotheca, there's 3 types of potions on this board that are face down. They're red, yellow, and blue. Some of them are face up at the beginning of the game. And you are trying to satisfy your apothecaries by getting 3 in a row of the same color. And you will do that by taking a certain number of actions on your turn, which means adding more of these potions to the board face down, flipping potions face up, which give you stones of that color of the potion that's flipped up, spending stones to buy more apothecaries, and using the special abilities of apothecaries to manipulate stuff on the board. It's almost like a dumbed-down version of Tashkalar. Arena of Legends, or just Tashkalar, I guess, where you're basically trying to put these down in these patterns. And it's simple, right? Renegade's whole shtick these days is they make these simple, fun games for people to play. And so it works. And I was like, it's okay. But then I played the variant game in which one person is a master and everyone else is playing against that person. And that's much more interesting. The master picks one color that's the only color they can score in, and everyone else can't score in that color. So the master's jumping from color to color, and players are trying to beat him, but the master has multiple people that he can use. And when you pay stones to use special abilities, you pay them directly to the master. It's very intriguing. It has a cool one versus all feel in an abstract strategy game that I've not seen before. So I like that. It's a new, cool idea. And so this is from Renegade Games, and it's Apotheca.
One of the joys of the pick list that Tom likes to make fun of is that occasionally a game will show up that I haven't played in a while, that I haven't had a chance to even really think about very much. And that happened this past weekend at our game group when Tigris and Euphrates hit the table. This is the Reiner Knizia classic where you are placing tiles that represent civilizations, and you're also placing your leaders on the board. and collecting cubes that you are trying to build evenly, because at the end of the game, you take the color that you have the least of, and that's your score. In fact, we refer to this as Knizia scoring at this point, and as far as I know, this is the first game to do this. Tigris and Euphrates is sort of an odd duck because it's hard to explain and to grasp the first time you play. Because part of the placing of these tiles is that eventually civilizations are going to collide. And you can also play leaders that represent one of the 4 colors in the game in an area that already has, say, a red leader. And then you're going to battle again. So there's these 2 kinds of conflicts, and they call them internal and external conflicts. And any time I teach this game, that's always the sticking point, the tricky part, because an internal conflict, each side is going to throw in tiles. You look at who has the most strength in red tiles. If your leader is next to 2 red tiles and my leader is next to 1 red tile, I'm already at a deficit. I need to throw more red tiles into this fight than you do. And that always is the case with an internal conflict when you've got somebody battling in one civilization in a color, even if it's not red. So if you have a blue leader and I blue leader and I put down a blue leader, we're battling in red tiles because we're battling over like religious supremacy. Then, when you battle an external conflict, like my civilization goes up against your civilization, we look at who has more green tiles. And then you battle by throwing in green tiles on each side. And this is that logical hurdle that always is difficult to teach new players. And I have not come up with a way to explain it that gets that across as quickly as possible without like printing out a huge player aid and like giant text. Tom, you've played like the newer version of Tigris and Euphrates. Did they explain that better in the new Fantasy Flight version?
Yeah, they actually called them something else in the Fantasy Flight version. It was like war versus something else.
Maybe.
Which helped differentiate them. It is a little confusing, but since it's like one of 2 rules, it's not so difficult. The internal just needs red, and the external needs the color of the things that are fighting. I don't find it that difficult to remember.
It always seems to be the sticking point in learning the game. And it's also one of those games you need to see things happen.
Oh, that I agree on. As a new person, I'll kick them all around the block in the game because I know what I should be doing. And even if I explain it, you got to kind of figure out how it works.
Right. It's very easy to set something in motion and then go, oh, that's what's going to happen when I do that. Oh, that's not good at all. I didn't want to do that. Well, it's too late. You've set it in motion and you're sort of stuck now. Oh. But I didn't make out it as that gave him like 12 cubes and I didn't get any. Yeah, well, yeah.
Do you like this game?
I still enjoy the game. It's a great game.
Okay, I'm just confused because this has been a negative episode.
No, and this is sort of turning things around because I enjoyed returning to Tigris and Euphrates. I didn't win, but it's a classic. I still enjoy it.
I just put Tigris and Euphrates in one of our top 10 video lists. You should go back and find it, folks. It went up last week. Okay, so now let's get to amazing time stories. I love time stories. I really do. And I had a chance to play the new expansion for time stories, The Prophecy of Dragons. Now, I was excited about Prophecy of Dragons because it was fantasy, which is something I like, but I also heard that it was possible to play this one with my family. And having played the first 2 modules, they're pretty intense, I guess, thematic. The first one's a little too maybe dark for kids.
Yeah.
And the second one's a little too... You haven't played the second one, right, Eric?
I haven't, but I know it's... Yeah, I think I know thematically.
The second one might be maybe gory, would be the word. And there's also adult themes in that one, too. I mean, we're talking like PG-13 stuff, but I'm just saying that for my kids, I'm very cautious when it comes to it.
Right. So you don't want to get halfway into the scenario and then go, oh, yeah, I don't think we want to do this.
Right. And I mean, I think some kids might be able to handle both scenarios just fine, but I was kind of like, eh. So this third one, I was hoping it was going to be good, but then the early reviews came out and they were like negative.
Oh.
And I was like, oh man, okay. Well, I guess, I had to have a misstep at some point. But the fact is that this is my favorite of the 3 scenarios thus far.
Oh.
I believe it has more content than the other ones.
It's like 3 decks as opposed to 2.
It is. It has the best artwork of the series, and that is really saying something.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same guy who did the artwork for Lewis and Clark.
Okay.
He's just phenomenal. Phenomenal. And without spoiling it, it took things I didn't expect happened in this. I think this is also the most replayable scenario.
Oh.
Which is interesting because I played this with Sam and Z, and if you guys want, you can watch our live playthrough if you don't care about spoilers on the internet. But I'm currently playing through it with my kids.
Ah.
And they are playing through doing something completely different than what we did, and it's still working. And I love that. There's things like, oh, so that's why that happened. And over here, there's a lot of stuff we missed in our run through.
A lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. Now, I will say that there's like some, well, how does this rule exactly work? And we're like, it works this way. Whatever. We're just here to have a good time. We don't get so hung up on trying to figure out exactly how a rule works. I just say this is how I think it should be.
Okay.
But I can understand that if you're like want the rules spelled out, that this one probably has more wiggle room in that regard than the other ones. And there's certainly more randomness in this one. But man, I loved it. I thought it advanced the overall story the most. If there is an overall story, which I think there is.
Huh.
And there's a plot twist per se, maybe? Or at least it put an idea in my head. And I was like, what? And I can't really, you'd have to play the game to understand what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Don't be going around looking for it. But there's something that I thought of after something happened, and I would love to talk to people about it, but they have to have already played it.
Interesting. Now, I have not played the Marcy case, which is the second expansion. Should I, because now that both of these are out, I think I'd rather do the fantasy one than the 1980s scenario.
Yeah, okay, I can see that, and I wonder about that, because I am playing this one with my kids, and they never played the first 2. And there's references, like, this is not a spoiler, but like you walk in and into the Time Stories room in the very beginning, and the guy's like, all right, here we go again. Well, the first time he's like, explains how it works to you.
Yeah.
So I was like acting as a DM for the kids as they did this, so I kind of like said it, and I explained how everything worked to them.
Right. Well, I guess, the first scenario comes in the base box, so the assumption is, of course, that you have played through Asylum.
I don't think you have to play Marcy Case before this one, but they definitely are doing them in order, and
Okay.
in a perfect world, you should do them in order, but you don't have to.
All right.
At least so far.
Because I really want to just rip open Prophecy of Dragons and yeah, like you said. So how did it work? It's working well with your daughters?
Oh man, they're loving it. Melody was like, this is like a role-playing game. I'm like, yeah, it really kind of is. And the other ones are like, oh, we had to stop, actually. I stopped at a certain point that was stoppable at, and said, we'll come back, and they're excited to do it some more. They had a good time with it. As for me, I think it might be in my top 10 favorite games of all time.
Wow.
That's how much I like Time Stories.
Just
It's
because
really...
of Prophecy of Dragons or just in general?
No, not just because of Prophecy of Dragons, but in general. I was expecting to not like one of the first 3 scenarios. The first one I wasn't sure about, right? And I played, I was like, this is amazing. The second one, when I found out what the theme was of the second one, I was like, oh, are you kidding me? And it was fun. The third one is I was like, oh, I don't know. Are they going to do a clunker? Not yet. Not to me anyway. I just love, this game is so good at something happening in the game and later on having a payoff.
Yeah.
And this one handled time travel, or the aspects of time travel, better than the other games did so far.
Interesting.
The other scenarios.
Man.
In fact, I'm just very excited about it.
I want to play it now.
Well, knock them both off. Just do them in a row.
Excuse
boom, boom.
me. Oh, no one's here to play with me right now. I have to wait.
So you played the first one, right?
Played through Asylum, and in fact, I taught it. I think we talked about it. I taught it at ConCon.
That's right. And so you I forget who you played it with. Was it your game group?
It was actually sort of an ad hoc couple of guys that came over specifically to play it, and we played through it all in one night.
Yeah, we'll do the same thing. These two, I think, might both be played slightly faster, maybe? I'm not sure.
Oh, interesting.
I think Sam, me, and Z, our playthrough was 4 hours and 15 minutes, maybe?
Right.
Or 4.5 hours?
Well,
so
that's a little longer than Asylum for us.
It's very possible that it could have been longer and or shorter based on decisions we had made.
Okay.
All right, well, Eric has no more games, so I'll talk about one more game, and that's Thunder and Lightning. All right, guys, I'm just on a roll talking about good stuff. Thunder and Lightning is a reworking of Hera and Zeus, which is a Richard Borg classic game. It's like Stratego, the card game. Well, Z-Man is republished it as Thunder and Lightning. It's basically Thor versus Loki now. But still has that same different gods and different things. They changed the names of the cards. But Z-Man decided a couple things. First of all, they said, let's make the artwork incredible. Cool. Let's make the card size and quality really good. And the card size nice and big. Then they fixed something that made me super happy was, let's put text on all the cards that says what they do. Because in the original game, that was not there. You had a Pegasus card in the original game, and you were like, this one lets me do this, right?
Right.
And
well, it was
like
language independent.
Yeah, and language independent's great, but when every card does different things. And then there was a few new cards that balance out the game for people who thought it was unbalanced. Richard Borg was talking to me about it. He said there's people who played it hundreds of times, and they're like, well, if you do this and this and this, sometimes this will happen. He's like, fine. And he made some cards to counter that. So I like the new cards. I like the look of it. It's a great two-player game. Every time I play this, I'm very impressed by it, to the point where I added it to my collection. Huzzah!
Huzzah!
A great game, Thunder and Lightning.
Cool.
Now, we've done talking about great games. Let's go back and talk about an old game.
Welcome to Cult of the Old, where I discuss games we may have forgotten about, or games that failed miserably but still had some good mechanics in them.
He's Brian Counter, and everything he does is counterproductive.
Today I wanted to do something a little bit different, a very short segment on the game Duo. Created in 1986 by Maureen Hiron, rated rank 5.24, and 10,915 on BoardGameGeek. Yes, pretty low, but bear with me. Partially inspired by a few geek lists I saw lately asking people to help them with choosing some family games. I thought, hey, this might be something that some might be interested in. Quite simply, Duo is, no surprise, a variation of Uno. And what you do is you deal out 7 cards to each player. You have 2 discard stacks, and the cards have 3 elements on them. A number, a shape, like a triangle, circle, square kind of thing, and different colors like orange, blue, and so on. To play a card to the discard pile, a player must match 2 of the 3, and once you start discarding to one of the discard stacks, that's the only one you can discard to. If you can't play a card, you draw one. First player out wins, and there's some points you can do with cards that other players have, but typically you just play a hand and that's it. Like Uno, there are wild cards and, if I remember right, reverse cards and those kinds of goofy things. But that's pretty much it. It's neither the best game in the world, nor does it do better than some more modern games. However, I will say, when my kids were younger, they're 18 and 21 now, this actually helped when they were really young, developing some rudimentary matching skills and just an excuse to get us all together at the table. And for that, it worked very well. Ruthie and I never pushed games on our kids, and we're not the type of parents that feel the quizzical need to post that our 5-year-olds are already playing Power Grid in public. I bring this up as just one of many alternatives for young families, if you feel like you need another option. This thing is long out of print, but there's a couple dirt cheap copies on BoardGameGeek, and frankly, you can make your own version at home if you need to. Duo.
And now, another tale of board gaming horror.
Oh my, that's horrific.
Gather round, children. The sky was cloudy, with a touch of rain over the streets of Prague as we walked to my girlfriend's house. Never having met my girlfriend's parents, I was hesitant to bring a game, but my girlfriend advised me otherwise, so I slipped Hanabi into my pocket. After dinner, and a bit of broken conversation with her family, I decided to try and sheepishly speak up. Would you like to try a new game? Everyone politely said yes, and I went about the rules explanation due to my lack of speaking Czech and my girlfriend's parents' broken English. The game rules took an hour. Although the rules only took 5 to 10 minutes, my girlfriend had a hard time explaining the concept of a cooperative card game to her family. After we settled in playing, most of the discussion and talk was in Czech, except on my turn, of course. The first game we lost miserably with a score of 7, and I thought no one would want to play again, but they wanted to try again. We played again, and miraculously, a perfect score. I was amazed. Maybe we got lucky on the draws. We played again, perfect. And again, another perfect. Finally, I said, would you like to add the multicolored fireworks into the game? Again, they politely agreed, and with some translation, my girlfriend was able to explain the new cards. But that's the amazing thing. We got yet another perfect. Amazing! We left later that night and decided to walk back to my apartment. The sky had cleared from earlier. I was high on life. 4 wins in a row, and one being with the multicolored fireworks, and on your parents' first try. My girlfriend turned to me with a solemn look of dismay on her face and said, "We did not win." With a look of confusion, I said, "What? What do you mean?" My girlfriend turned to me with a great look of sadness and explained, "After losing the first game so miserably, my parents decided it's a cooperative game. Why should we lose? They were helping everyone a bit more than they should, even you, but I would translate to something appropriate." All I could say in a sad, sad voice was, "Oh, okay." She turned to me and asked, "You hate my parents, don't you?" I did not respond as it began to rain on the cobblestone streets of Prague.
Yeah, I love this story. I'm just surprised he didn't figure it out to the second game.
Yeah, this is a little too easy, isn't it?
Oh,
that's funny.
It's
a cooperative game. We can make whatever rules we want.
We need to make...
That is the danger with Hanabi. I feel like it's easy to bend the rules and be a little less strict than you should be. And because it's a cooperative, it's like, yeah, okay, yeah.
For me, Hanabi was just that thing. I was like, oh, that is cool. That's fun. It's interesting. But I could never play it again the rest of my life and be okay. Because it doesn't seem like it prevents that much of an interesting difference in challenges. It's kind of the same thing every time. It really would fit in the same category as solitaire. I'll play solitaire. You know, there's different ways to organize those cards every time, and I'll play that. But if you said to me, Tom, you could never play solitaire again in your life, I'd be like, oh, okay. That's the kind of how I feel about Hanabi. It's like a 4-player version of solitaire where we're all working together to solve it. I don't mean that to be negative against the game. I think the game is fine. But yeah, it does have kind of loose rules about that sort of thing. And I think it's hilarious. Oh, we need to make this boy happy. He's just, okay.
He looks so sad.
Just listen, you have a red 3, green 4, yellow.
Yeah.
That's funny.
That's pretty funny.
All right, let's find out what's going on with Jeff.
time for GameTek with Jeff Engelstein, where we find out how games really work.
2015 saw a number of innovations in incorporating narrative and storytelling into tabletop games. And Pandemic Legacy led the charge, with time stories also adding a unique twist. Now, while there are some unique challenges facing tabletop games, I'm very excited about their future prospects to tell stories and involve the players in a dynamic, intense, and personal way. The storytelling itself is as old as humanity and has spawned a huge body of work about the art of storytelling, with perhaps the earliest example being Aristotle's Poetics. Now, in an attempt to educate myself about storytelling and the art of narrative, I've been doing a lot of reading. And currently I'm working through Story by Robert McKee, which is specifically about writing screenplays, but the narrative structures and techniques he talks about are universal. Here is his encapsulation of the concept of a story. Now, for better or worse, an event throws a character's life out of balance, arousing in him the conscious and or unconscious desire for that which he feels will restore balance, launching him on a quest for his object of desire against forces of antagonism, inner, personal, or extrapersonal. He may or may not achieve it. This is Story in a nutshell. Now, some of this tracks very well with the natural structure of a game. The object of desire is the victory conditions of the game. The forces of antagonism are the other players, and the mechanics of the game itself that force you to jump through hoops to achieve the goal. Now, I was struck by the first part. An event throws a character's life out of balance, what McKee calls the inciting incident. This seems like a real challenge to capture in a game. In a movie, there's usually some time spent setting up the characters and their world before the incident, whatever it is, happens, that throws the protagonist out of their normal life and sets the story in motion. So how do we do that in a game? We immediately move into the game, the story part, and there isn't an opportunity to feel like us as players or the characters we represent in the game get kicked out of their comfort zone. What can be our inciting incident? Now, Pandemic Legacy cracks this puzzle wide open. The key? That almost all the people who are playing it have played base Pandemic, usually many times, so they have a baseline about what a normal game of Pandemic looks like. There is a comfort zone, and that allows the designers to pull the rug out from under the players in the first game so that they truly feel like they are moving into unknown territory, that their expectations no longer hold, that truly anything can happen, and that they need to do something to set the world right again. And I think the cooperative nature of Pandemic is also a big part of why this works. The co-op nature gives the players definite roles in the world and the story that it is creating. On the other hand, in Risk Legacy, the players did not have a defined, consistent role in the world. The legacy portion of the game allowed the players to construct their own unique shared history in the game world, but it seemed more like a series of variants than an integrated story. Now, Pandemic Legacy takes this to the next level by building on player expectations to craft a unique narrative journey. I'm very curious to see if Seafall is successful in this regard, as it lacks the shared basis of what a game is supposed to look like, which was present in Pandemic Legacy, as well as the cooperative nature. I also think this gives insight into why Time Stories, while engaging, has not reached a high narrative level. Because of the premise of the game and the way characters are or are not presented, there is no inciting incident that impacts the players in a meaningful way. Yes, there is a way that the time stream has been disrupted that the players need to fix, but for all the detailed narrative that the game drops on the players, it does not do a good job of showing protagonists that have had their life thrown out of balance. Another way to quickly create the inciting incident is to put the players in a familiar trope from fiction. For example, in Robinson Crusoe, you are shipwrecked on an island and need to find a way to escape. The players inherently understand their motivation and how they've been dislocated from their usual routine, and it does not require any lengthy setup or backstory. Now, whether this turns into anything or not for me, learning more and more about the elements that make up a story have helped me gain new insight into my designs and give me ideas and insights into the designs of others. I hope that this inspires you as well. This is Jeff Engelstein with GameTek.
I'm the Broken Meeple, and this is the Starting Tile, where I talk about alternative gateway games that you might not have considered that can be used to introduce new players to our hobby. Hello everyone, thank you for joining me on episode 3 of The Starting Tile. Now, I've already talked about memory games and tile selection games. I'm going to go one step lighter, in fact, and talk about party games this time. Now, with party games, they deserve a place in everybody's collection, just like all the strategic and tactical games. So let's start off with Dixit. Dixit is a really unique party game where you all have a hand of cards that are covered in this weird storybook-style imagery. Think of it as like the back end of Tim Burton's Subconscious created half of this stuff. And you select a card and give a clue about it. It can be any clue you like. Sound, words, song, phrase, poem, whatever comes to your mind, and you put it face down. Everybody else, with the same number of cards in their hand, selects one of their images that they think best describes the one that you've just given the clue for. And the idea is that they're all shuffled together and laid out face up, and the other players have to try and guess which one the clue giver was referring to without picking somebody else's card, because you get points for getting the right answer, but you also give away points for picking somebody else's card because they get the points for someone guessing theirs. It's a really unique party game, and there's been so many expansions for this with all these different styles of art. It's all weird and wacky imagery, but you get different artists doing it and you notice these differences. So there's so many cards now. So give Dixit a try. If you've never heard of it, I guarantee it will be certainly something new and fresh for you. Next up is a game that puts the likes of Pictionary to shame. That game where you had to draw something really well in order to do good at the game. Chuck that in the garbage. Let me give you Telestrations. Telestrations is effectively the drawing version of Chinese Whispers. Chinese Whispers was the old classic thing where you whisper a message to someone, and then as it gets passed down to other people, the message gets more garbled as time goes on, and little clues and little bits start getting muddled up. Well, this is the same thing, but with drawing erase pads. Because here, you all start off with a card with a word on it. It can be a phrase, well, it may be a phrase, it's mainly like a noun or an object, that kind of thing. And the idea is that you have to draw a picture of describing that word. And then you pass these pads, the dry erase pads, round in a circle, and then the person after you has to try and guess what the picture is you've just given him. He writes down the word he thinks it is, and then passes it on to the next person, who then has to draw the word that he's just been given. The game carries on in this fashion until everybody has had everybody's pad and either written a word or drawn in it, depending on what time it got round to them. You then look at all the pads after the game is finished and laugh your socks off as to what has happened with these original clue words and how the pictures have just got completely misinterpreted from starting point to finishing point in how badly people draw. And unlike Pictionary, drawing badly in this actually makes the game more fun. I cannot draw my way out of a paper bag. I suck at drawing, which means that I love playing this game because my misinterpretations of a drawing, or my drawings that get completely sideswiped into some tangent miles away, is always a good laugh, and I don't care. I know I can't draw, but it makes this game hilarious. Get it with a full count of 8 people if you can. If you've got the party pack, which I think only exists in the US, then get it up to 12 people doing this, and it is a blast. Telestrations. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this segment. My name is Luke from The Broken Meeple, and I welcome you to the hobby. The starting tile is laid out, the drinks and snacks are ready. Let the games begin.
Hello, I'm Skip Hampton, with yet another tale of betrayal. We were playing a game of Dead of Winter one evening. Throughout the game, I had been trying to exile a particular player. Quite often, she is my go-to when it comes to player suspicion, but this game she seemed particularly shady. I tried to call for an exile vote every chance I got, and I kept getting shut down. I'll admit that part of my enthusiasm to exile this player was enthusiasm to exile any player. I had never done that in the game and wanted to experience that new dynamic. Eventually, the game wore on, and the outlook grew bleaker and bleaker for the colony survivors, as is the case in Dead of Winter. But it suddenly became clear to me that we could win by exiling her. Most of her characters were in the colony. Exiling would remove her people from the colony, and we would have more food to go around. We were on the cusp of victory if we could agree to cut her loose. Case closed. Or so I thought. Convincing everyone else was like pulling teeth. No one wants to be the bad guy, except me, I guess. Eventually, I was able to convince one of the other players. He had nothing to lose, as he had already fulfilled his own secret objective. The one holdout left was my girlfriend. She was still in need of a card to achieve her secret objective, and wasn't ready to end the game just yet because of it. So I bargained with her. As it turns out, I was holding the coveted book card she needed. I told her I'd give it to her if she voted in favor of the exile. She did. I gave her the card. But I was playing Greybeard the Pirate, and once per round I may take a card at random from another player. I immediately turned to my girlfriend and took a card from her hand. It was a book card. In a matter of moments, I took back the victory that I had just bestowed upon her. Next time I call to exile a player, I'd expect you to support me sooner, I said in smug satisfaction. She sat there in shock as we closed out the last round. Victory was shared that day, but only by two of us. In the end, the exiled player turned out to be the game's betrayer. But if you ask my girlfriend, she will tell you otherwise. Bye.
Now,
wow.
This is kind of one of those moments where I feel like the person who did this is going to get yelled at by on our forums. Don't you?
Yes. This is not going to go well. Well, although I think if you're playing Dead of Winter, this sort of behavior might be expected.
Well, okay. Part of it's expected, except for the part where he says, you lose, and the next time I say exiled player, you better support me.
Yeah.
That's metagaming. Because he's saying in a future game, if I tell you to do something, you better do it or this is going to happen. I have a problem with that, actually. And I would hope that she would, like, I don't know, maybe slip at the couch or something. That's just,
Yeah. And also, you know, why are you trying to reduce the player pool of folks that win the game?
Right. That's the thing. See, it wasn't like I could understand Betrayal if he won and she didn't and it was like an individual game, but they were actually on the same team.
Right.
They were on the same team and he deliberately made her lose.
Right. He didn't have to take a card from her.
No. Oh, man. Oh. He says,
yeah.
If you ask my girlfriend, she will tell you otherwise. Yes, I can imagine that.
I think a few folks on the forum will agree with her, yes.
I want to see someone have his back on that one because I don't get it. I mean, I get the whole, betraying thing. Okay, it's fine. You gotta be able to betray people in the game. But it wasn't like he betrayed her. It's like he punished her.
Yeah.
And he punished her for not listening to him. And that's where I have the problem. Because it almost comes across as, you better listen to me or I'll smack you down. And it's, what?
Yeah.
I mean, is that in the game? It's if you will join my alliance or I'll destroy you. That person doesn't sound fun to play games with. Maybe that's not it. Maybe that's not the way it is. You can email us and tell us extenuating circumstances, I'm sure. But I'm just telling you now, I think the internet forum is going to be cruel to you.
Yeah.
But, this does bring into mind something that I meant to talk about last episode or 2 episodes ago, and I didn't, was using games to vet people. We've I think mentioned this before, like if you had an interview, what game would you make people play?
Yeah.
And I've joked in the past that if I play, I might play games with my future son-in-laws and see how they handle everything. I don't actually have plans to do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
At the same time, can you tell something about a person by the way they play a board game?
Certainly with a social game like Dead of Winter, I think you can.
Well, but someone might betray you in a game, but they would never actually do that in real life.
Perhaps.
Well, I would hope so, because I have betrayed often. in games.
Yes.
I haven't actually betrayed anyone in a really long time in a board game, but I've tricked people, I've been deceptive, I've been mean to people when the game called for it.
Yeah. I mean, you could also get a sense of how somebody handles disappointment, winning, losing.
Well, now that I think is very viable. How do you handle the both winning and losing a game? How do you handle when someone stabs you in the back, or how do you handle these things? Because that, I think, is a viable option. And if someone would explode in a game, there's a good chance they're going to explode in real life. If someone has to win a game at all costs, and that includes cheating, but not limited to cheating, but doing whatever they can, they must win, and they're satisfied only with winning. Is that how life is going to be also? Yeah. I don't know. I think that this is a possibility, something that can be done. Should I vet the boys someday?
Yes, and I think it'll be funny when, whatever the first lucky guy is going to spread the word to the others.
All right, listen, well, when you play diplomacy.
Yeah, here's what you got to do, buddy. Don't make the same mistake I did. I barely made it out of there alive.
All right, welcome to the Vassal House. Now, listen, in lieu of me just talking to you about my daughter, and I'm not going to put any ground rules down, whatever, but you got to go through this gaming marathon. 48 hours of games.
And we'll film it and put it on the internet.
Yeah. I believe after those 48 hours, I would be one less daughter.
You just lock the door and you just hear her knocking. Dad, let him out. He's done enough.
I jest, everybody.
Let's get some good advice for dealing with children.
Hello, once again, Ken here with Dudes on a Board, and I want to discuss something that really is not new to the board gaming conversation, and that is games that you can play with your kids. Now, for me, that specifically means war games that you can play with your kids. Now, many of the war games that I have maybe stretch beyond their current strategic abilities. I would like to think they will get there one day. But for the time being, you got to find what you can find. Now, the game that introduced me into wargaming to begin with was Risk. So you can always pull down a copy of the old school Risk game, if that suits you. Now, the problem with Risk, if you play it the way the rules are written, which I never do, if you do, that game can go on forever, and we all know that. People are throwing 40, 50, 60 armies out there, and nobody wins. It's impossible. It gets boring and tedious. So, that version aside, trying to find an alternate one was something that consumed quite a bit of my time over the years of collecting these games. You do have two different versions that have been labeled a Risk Junior. Over multiple countries in Europe, there was Risk Junior Narnia Edition, which was designed by Richard Borg, one of my favorite board game designers, so I hate to say anything negative with his name on it. However, exception made right here. Risk Junior Narnia did not work. For that reason, I know a lot of people like it, and as a non-Risk game, it's okay. It's pretty good. You will spend more time figuring out that game, in my opinion, than just a regular Risk or one of the other many versions that have been branded over the years. So you move along to Italy, who has produced Risico Junior. Risico is the Italian version of Risk, slightly different components, but essentially it is Risk. This one is a cooperative version of Risk in which all players are on an island trying to fend off an attacking force. Problem there, you're going to spend more on shipping than you will for the game itself. So, not a reasonable option for most. If you move on to the next possibility here would be the different branded US available versions, the Star Wars universes, the Marvel universes, the Transformers version. All of these are fun in the sense that you can play with these different characters that your kids may be a fan of. However, for me, if you were to pick one version to play with your kids to hopefully convert them into die-hard board gamers, would be Risk Plants vs. Zombies. USAopoly released it. in 2013 has arguably the best components you will ever see in a Risk game. A beautiful board, two-sided, two different ways to play the game. It is a two-player game, so if you have more than one kid you're playing with, I have two sons, they create a team to fight against me. It is fun, it is light, it is colorful, it fits with the theme of Plants vs. Zombies, especially considering the reverse side of the board, which has a Plants vs. Zombies game. So, if you want to teach Risk to your kids and hopefully get them hooked, that is the route to go. Thank you for listening. Ken here with the Dudes on a Board.
Tales of Amazement.
A couple of times a year, our game group organizes an all-day Saturday game day. This gives us the opportunity to play some longer or bigger games that would normally not get played at our normal game night. At one of these, we organized a full 8-player game of Memoir 44 Overlord. Memoir is a favorite game for both me and my wife. We had played some Overlord scenarios with just the two of us, and we were both excited to get the opportunity to get the full Overlord experience. I arrived at the venue early to set up the Cadets of Samur scenario, which was one of the pre-printed Overlord maps that Days of Wonder had printed a few years ago. All 8 players arrived, and it was quickly determined that my wife and I had the most experience at Memoir 44, so we were selected to be the commanding generals. I took up the side of the French cadets, and my wife led the German invaders. Things started off badly for my side. The special scenario rules stated the German side could use recon cards as air power cards, and my wife kept drawing recon cards for the same flank. My poor troops got decimated. A few turns in, the Germans had a sizable lead of 6-2. At this point, my usually reserved wife started doing a lot of trash talking. After I complained about unlucky dice rolls, she even offered to call the Wambulance. A couple of turns later, she asked if I wanted to concede yet. When I said confidently that we could still come back, she replied, "Want to bet on it?" My wife threw down her terms. The loser had to wash dishes for a week. What could I do? I was in a losing position on the board, but I could not back down to her in front of my friends. I took her bet. At this point in the game, the French position improved. Our troops were in good defensive positions, and the German soldiers crashed against them like waves against the rocks. Slowly, we gained medals and even eked into the lead. As the game entered the final turns, my allies' side was 1 medal from winning, and the Axis was 2 away. My wife's team took their turn. They attacked for the win, but bad dice rolls kept them from getting victory. It was my side's turn on. I looked at the board, and we were in trouble. Several of our units were down to 1 figure left, and all of her frontline units were at near full strength. I knew this was our last chance to win. And then I saw my opportunity. The Germans had a single infantry figure they had pulled back into trees. I had the Behind Enemy Lines card, which would allow one of our infantry to advance close enough to get a shot with a single die. The odds of hitting infantry are 50%. The whole game came down to a 50-50 die roll. I shared the plan with the commander of the appropriate flank and assigned him the command card. He played the card, and everyone saw his target. Everyone stood up at the gravity of the situation. He rolled the die. We all held our breath. It landed on a grenade. A hit. My side had won. I must confess that over the course of the next week, I dirtied as many dishes as possible. Huzzah!
We're going to come across as like the show of jerky guys.
I know. Well, that one, I'm okay with.
All right, but she did start it because I know that Wambulance thing will get me going. If you go, I'll be like, oh, the dice are going bad. Oh, do you want me to call the Wambulance?
Yeah, I think that would probably get me.
I have to point out that I've
fuming.
never in my life seen someone grumbling and whining in a game and someone call them out on it in a sarcastic way and that person go, "You're right. You're right. I've been having a bad attitude." and then become
You
cheerful.
make a fine point. Criticism taken. Well done.
Well, I might have seen some people. Maybe I have seen some people who are like, okay, look, I'll try to have a better attitude. But for the most part, when they're like, rah, 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 oh, do you want me to call the ambulance? That's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to some more contributors.
Hey, board gamers. This is BJ from Board Game Gumbo. Sometime, somewhere, someone introduced you to hobby gaming. You probably started out with a gateway game like Ticket to Ride. You taught it to your friends and family. Hey, everybody's happy. Now what? Here in Louisiana, we're never satisfied with anything boring or bland. We like to spice it up. So for your next game night, grab a copy of New York 1901. It's a 2015 release from Blue Orange Games. It's designed by Chenier LaSalle from Quebec. It's got beautiful artwork from Vincent Dutré. You'll remember him from Elysium and Lewis and Clark. There's even an excellent visual fact that you can get from the geek. It was created by the designer and explains some of those not-so-clear rules questions. Each player tries to earn the most victory points by putting buildings on the cityscape of turn-of-the-century New York. Players fill up the map with ever larger, more complicated buildings, and demolishing a few smaller and older properties on the way. You can rack up big bonus points at the end if you build on the randomly favored streets. There are only a few actions you can take each turn, so this is a good next step game for your new players. Once any player gets down to only 4 buildings left, the game is over and the points are tallied. The playtime says 45 minutes, and once you get a couple of games under your belt, you'll be setting up, playing, and tearing down in about an hour, and maybe less depending upon the players. Why is this game spicier than Ticket to Ride? Because even though I consider it a lighter game, there's so much more to think about than in Ticket to Ride. It makes a perfect game to introduce that next level of strategy to your fellow new gamers. Even with the limited number of options, you still have to be efficient with your planning and your moves. You got to keep an eye on your fellow builders, and there's bonus cards and legacy buildings that add another layer of strategy. There's even a little bit of higher player interaction than in Ticket to Ride. And finally, you have that juicy tension that comes when one of the players gets down to 5 to 7 buildings, especially if you still have a lot left to build. So if your game nights are getting bland, spice it up with New York 1901. I give it 4 out of 5 cayenne peppers. Until next time, laissez le bon temps rouler.
Hi, this is Mike Rudman, and welcome to Bonus Action. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to take part in a humanitarian medical mission on board the U.S. Navy hospital ship Comfort. To give you a little background, I am a dentist in the Navy, and I served as the dental department head on the ship for Continuing Promise, a 5-month deployment to 9 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. We spent about 10 or 12 days in each country, places like Guatemala and Haiti, sending teams ashore to set up field clinics in remote areas and providing medical and dental care to those in need. So what does this have to do with games? Well, stay with me. It probably goes without saying that this mission was a very rewarding experience, but it was also a difficult one for a lot of reasons. The days were long, hot, and humid, and there really wasn't much time off at all. While in each country we worked straight through weekends, and even on the days at sea between countries, most of the time was spent gearing up for the next stop. And after a couple of months of this, people really started to get tired and irritable and a little bit down sometimes. I sensed that people in our department were losing steam. One night on the ship, as we were getting ready to pull into another port, I got everyone together for our regular evening meeting. But rather than just review the plans for tomorrow, we pulled some chairs into a large circle. There were about 30 people there. And I broke out my copy of Bezier Games' Ultimate Werewolf. So, on the off chance that you don't know about Werewolf, here's the 15-second synopsis. Everyone's a resident of a village that's being plagued by werewolves. There are secret roles. Most people are villagers, a few are werewolves, and some other special roles are mixed in. And over the course of several turns, broken into days and nights, the villagers must figure out who the werewolves are. The werewolves must gradually pick off villagers until one side emerges victorious. It's the classic social deduction game with lots of intrigue, excitement, and chaos, and pretty much no one wanted to play. As I explained what we were about to do, I was mostly greeted with blank stares and more than a few eye rolls. I had thought this would be a great way to unwind and have a good time, but now I was doubting myself. Not surprisingly, it started off slowly and painfully. The first couple of turns were awkward, to say the least, as people tried to figure out what the heck this was all about. But then the game started to pick up. One young sailor who was accused of being a werewolf made an unexpectedly passionate and very funny speech about why he could not possibly be a werewolf, and then was promptly voted out of the circle. And something pretty miraculous happened. The whole thing just started to click. Accusations started flying, people started shouting and laughing, cheering when werewolves were correctly accused, high-fiving, everything. All of that exhaustion and irritability, it just melted away. They loved it. After the game, the one guy who was probably the most annoyed at the whole prospect at the beginning was the first to ask if we could play again. So of course we did. Now, I'm not going to get all dramatic and claim that this night of werewolf saved our mission or anything like that. Ultimately, our motivation and purpose that summer was something far greater. But I will say that without a doubt, something changed after that night. As we went ashore the next day, there was a palpable difference in the mood and the energy level of our crew. I could see people who had previously not had much in common or much to say to each other, laughing and recounting stories from the night before. It gave us a boost when we really needed it, took our minds off the stress of the mission, and just gave us a chance to spend time together having fun. Probably more than any other gaming experience I've had, it proved to me that games, especially social games like Werewolf, have the ability to tap into something that I think we all share, no matter our background. At the end of the day, people like to play together. Not in front of a screen, not over a network, but sitting in a room together and sharing a collaborative, exciting, fun experience. Games really have the power to bring out the best in people. Be proud of your hobby, Dice Tower listeners, and share it with others. It may come in handy when you least expect it. Next time I will try to make the case for why we as a community need to stop bashing Monopoly.
It's time for the Dice Tower's Question of the Week, sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., in which our team of gaming experts answers one of your questions, thus increasing the odds that someone will get it right. This week's question: what are the pros and cons of retheming a game?
This is Brian from Cult of the Old. First, the negative: time. It takes time to create cards, boards, and putting them all together, plus toner and all that kind of stuff. However, for me, it's worth it. I'm one of those crazy fools who just likes making stuff whether it's needed or not. Retheming can be fun. You feel part of its recreation. You can cater it to what you want or your group wants, and you can have so much more fun with end product. I bought and rethemed the Hobby World game Hollywood with real stars and directors, and the worthless script cards became the worst movies of all time. And when we play that, it's easily 10 times the amount of joy because of the retheme. I've done my own personalized love letter and those kinds of things, and those are great fun, well worth the time.
Hey everyone, it's Mark Zielinski, and retheming games. Yes, there are definitely pros and cons to it. Let's pick a pro. Well, take Vinci, make it Small World. How awesome is that? You took an average board game that probably would have been lost in the dusts of time, and it turns into an international smash hit that spawns all sorts of different expansions and iPad apps and everything else. And, it's a great game. So, a simple retheming really helped out there. And cons, well, just take a flip through the Reiner Knizia catalog and pick your favorite retheming failure.
This is Ryan from Out of Game, and I would say the biggest pro to retheming a game, and maybe this is too obvious, but it's just appealing to a wider audience. And I would say the biggest con of retheming a game is annoying longtime fans of the original game.
Jonathan from the Snakes Cast. Theme in a board game can serve two major purposes. One is to make the rules more intuitive, easier to understand, because they make sense in the context of what we would imagine in a real version of the fictional world inside the game. And two, they give players a reason to care about what's going on, because they're fans of whatever the theme happens to be. Both of these things can be used to good effect or to bad effect. Like, for example, when they rethemed Dune to make it not Dune. That would be the bad effect. Whereas retheming an abstract game like Loco or Quandary to have cute little plastic animals that you can pick up and move around, that's an example of a good retheme that makes people more invested in what's going on.
Hi, Luke from the Broken Meeple, and the pro and con for retheming the game is actually the same point if you think about it, because you might have had a game that you liked the mechanics but you didn't really care about the theme. You might, it's a farming game and it works really well, but you don't like farming. If you retheme it to something that appeals to you more, then you're going to like the game more as a result. But the flip side of that is that you might suddenly take a game that you had a theme that you really, really loved And now they've shoved some theme on it that's like, oh, this is actually worse than the original. I'm not as fussed to play it anymore. So you could see where you might get the same point for a pro and con, and that's where I sit on this one.
Okay, I think a few people have already made my point, although it looks like some folks thought that we were talking about them retheming games and not publishers retheming games. But retheming can cause a game to reach a new audience. And the only time it's a bad thing is when that theme doesn't match. And a lot of times this happens when a license, an IP, is overlaid over an existing game. And you sort of go, what? Oh, wait, okay, that kind of fits, but I don't know if I really feel like this is a real Powerpuff Girls game. It really just feels like Carcassonne. Not really Powerpuff Girls.
No, I think sideways theming is fine. I think that's a good thing I talked about earlier was Thunder and Lightning and Hera and Zeus. Hey, it moved to Thor and Loki, two gods in a slightly different pantheon of gods.
I don't have a problem with that. No.
Right, that's sideways theming. It's the same thing, basically. Or like when you take Memoir 44 and they reworked it into a, Commands and Colors, another war game. But sometimes they've taken, I'm trying to think, do you remember Kingdoms from Fantasy Flight Games?
Vaguely.
And they rethemed that as Beowulf.
Yes.
The movie game or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was okay, but the Beowulf thing didn't make any sense. And so people come into this game and they're like, oh, and then it's not really about Beowulf. And that's the problem with taking these things is you add them in and people come in expecting that, but the game wasn't designed around that theme. So it's not, it's not a perfect fit.
Well, like the Cryptozoic retheming of Six Nimmt to The Walking Dead, the card game.
Yeah, see, I don't know. I'm not keen on that. I mean, I'm kind of glad that maybe a good game will sell more copies, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
Like, I think it's hilariously crazy, like, what the Cryptozoic is doing with that DC deck building game, that it's also a hockey game. It's also Lord of the Rings. It's also whatever.
Right, the Cerberus engine deck building game.
And I really am going to play a live stream of that someday where we mix them all together.
Mix them all together with the hockey goals?
Batman scores a goal on Gandalf.
That's funny.
Yeah, I think it actually would be funny. But it would also be playing it ironically. But I think that if you're going to reprint a game, you should take a look at the theme and go, can we make this better? Can we change this? But if the theme worked well in the beginning, then keep it, I think.
Right.
I don't know.
It's almost all I mean, if you're going to change the theme of an existing game, that's got to be a marketing decision. I think it's rarely that you go, this theme didn't really work mechanically. I guess it happens occasionally.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, that's true. It's not very often that, we kept the same theme, but we just changed most of the mechanisms. But that has happened. Runebound 2nd to 3rd edition.
Yeah.
Rethemings don't... I'm trying to think. Maybe there's one where retheming really took off. Like, for example, Dune was rethemed to Rex. And they tried to match it up as much as possible, but it just didn't feel the same to most people, I think.
Right. I understand people are upset about that one, but we still get people complaining. Like Jonathan from Snakes and Lattes was still upset about Dune not being Dune, but it couldn't have been Dune. They couldn't get the license anymore.
Right.
Like, I don't understand that. I understand being disappointed, but it seems like the vitriol on that one. It's like, why did they do this? They did it because they wanted to release the game, but they couldn't get the license. That's the only way that the game was going to be reprinted, is if it wasn't Dune. Anyway. That means sometimes you have to retheme a game. There's an example.
Yeah.
If the game was going to see a new audience, and it was generally regarded as a good game, the only way to do that was to remove the theme.
What do you think about Ignacy retheming Predator into a video game thing?
That sounds fun.
Yeah, and that's a situation where I think both themes work. Somebody was like really annoyed by it. They're like, I got a comment on one of the YouTube videos. They're like, designing dresses is for 6-year-old girls and designing video games is for 6-year-old boys. I said, well, what is that? I like both themes. So what does that make me? Am I a 12-year-old neutral child?
Yes, that's how math works, Tom.
No, but I mean, sometimes one theme, like the Predator, I think the whole fashion designing, I think that theme works, but it didn't work for everybody, right? I didn't have a problem with it, but some like, I don't want to design dresses. All right, fine, but you want to ship cloth to Cuba? But the
now, what's the game from? It started with Plaid Hat, but it's not Plaid Hat anymore. I think it's a Z-Man release. It just got shuffled over to the other division. That is being released in 2 versions. One themed as a pretty straightforward Euro, and another that is far more thematic, but it is basically the same game. It's Convoy? Is that right?
Convoy's a Portal game.
No, yes, that is a Portal game. Caravan. It's called Caravan.
I don't remember this being announced from Plaid Hat then, I guess.
It was discussed on the Plaid Hat podcast. It started life there, and it is now a Z-Man Games release that should be out in 2016. A Spice Road and Crystal Golem edition.
I see that. So there's 2 versions of this game. Oh, this reminds me back of when the guys made those 2 versions of the same game, Bonobo Beach and the Castle game. They were the exact same game. It's the same people who made Lost Valley. And so they made this game about placing tiles down. It was Kronberg was about placing tiles down as you built this castle, and Bonobo Beach was about putting people on a beach where you were like around people who you want to be on the beach. And it was the exact same game, but themed 2 different ways. I'm always curious about stuff like this. Like, is one of the themes better than the other? Like for me, Kronberg was about building a castle, which I kind of preferred maybe to the beach theme, except the beach theme I have in no game. So I'd rather play that one. In this one here, what do we got? The Crystal Golem and what was the other thing?
The Spice Road edition. So a very straightforward Euro and then a fantasy design, but it's the same guts.
Well, now you know that I'm not biased towards fantasy per se, but I'm biased against Spice Roads. Are you kidding me?
I hate Spice Roads.
I'm going to talk to Emerson. Spice
I think it's a fascinating experiment to see which one sells better. It could be that one goes out of print. One may be a collector's item. If the game takes off, but only in one of the 2 themes, then one may get reprinted and the other one won't.
We've really run this. We're so far off track where we were at the beginning. But all right, folks, tell us what you think in the forums. We'd love to hear back about this sort of thing. I love for you guys to talk about this topic and maybe mention games that were rethemed that you liked or did not like. And hey, we always appreciate hearing from you guys. Get involved in our forums. Send us questions. Say hi to us at conventions. I'm trying to think what convention we'll be at next. That will be the Cool Mini or Not convention in May, probably.
Okay.
Although I'm going to the F2Z headquarters in a week or 2.
I saw that on a press release from them.
And so maybe I'll see these caravans here. And if they say, which do you want, I'll take Crystal Golem, and Eric, you can have Spice Road.
Thanks.
That's my generosity to you.
That's my gift to you.
Folks, thanks for listening to the Dice Tower. Until next time, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Eric Summerer.
And you've been listening to our show.
Thanks for listening. Promotional consideration has been provided by game publishers in the form of review copies of games. This episode, number 454, was recorded on April 6th, 2016. Coming up next week, it's our top 10 games that teach math. This podcast is sponsored by listeners like you. Thank you for your continued support. And speaking of support, the Jack Vassell Memorial Fund is dedicated to providing support to members of the board gaming community in their hour of need. If a catastrophic event has turned your game upside down, find out how we can help at jackvassell.org. The Dice Tower is produced by Tom and me, with assistance from Jason Thompson, Itai Perez, Eric Matthews, and Rob Searing. Public sightings of that guy who played Robin provided by Ward on the Street. Timothy Pinkham composed our theme, and hosting is provided by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games at great prices at CoolStuffInc.com. Let us know what you think of the show by posting to the Dice Tower Guild at BoardGameGeek.com, following the Dice Tower on Twitter, or by emailing us at Dicetower@gmail.com. And don't forget to visit the other shows in the Dice Tower Network, including Boards and Swords, Start Space, the Plaid Hat Podcast, The Long View, the Secret Cabal Gaming Podcast, and Board Game University. Find out more at DicetowerNetwork.com. Until next time, from all the gang at the Dice Tower, have fun gaming. So what theme would make Cosmic Encounter better?
Nothing is better than space. Unless, of course, you were fighting in a grocery store.
Ooh. All the different shoppers in the grocery store?
Angry shopper. Hate the shopper. Love the shopper. The human shopper.
The virus shopper is the guy who sneezes all over the shopping cart?
The macro is the BJ shopper. He buys everything in packs of 4.
See? It's a gold mine. Get on the phone to Fantasy Flight.